If we are, we can log in again.
What's that, Danny?
If we are, we can log in again. Just log in again.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Go to this. Let's go to, oops, that's not what I want. I want to mute everybody. Close. Mute all. Okay. So, as always, feel free to unmute yourselves if you have what to ask, to add, feel free. We are in the middle of chapter 8, Parak 8 in Tanya. Just a little review of three things, the three parts we were talking about now. He's talked about the idea that when a person passes away, there are three potential stages that a person would need to go through, both physically and spiritually. The purpose of which is what sounds like an onesh or punishment, but we're going to discuss a little bit more in depth tonight, that it's really for a matter of cleansing, for a matter of getting past our what we've done to ourselves physically and spiritually, so that we can go before Hashem after 120 years. And I just want to, as I can, maybe a little cutesy introduction for tonight. Actually, before I do the cutesy introduction, let me mention to you, the three things were as follows. The lowest level, so to speak, is what was known as chibut hakever, which is when a person passes away and their body decomposes in the grave. It's supposed to be very difficult for the body. How, again, don't know. It's the decomposition process. The next one was called kafakela, which we read a little bit about last week, and we're going to talk a little bit more about tonight. We saw Rav Steinsaltz's opinion of what that means, and we're also going to see Rav Ginsburg's tonight. The basic idea is something happens to the neshama, that the neshama is taken, according to Rav Steinsaltz, is taken and thrown, as it were, from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. It's supposed to be very difficult for the neshama, but it's also supposed to be a cleansing process. How? Well, we'll see that in a minute or two from Rav Ginsburg. And the third is when this first step's not enough, the second step's not enough, and the third step, which is Gehinnom. But it wasn't just the Gehinnom or the hell that we're used to, the concept of heat and fire, but he mentioned something else called Gehinnom shel Sheleg, or Gehinnom of snow. And he's not talking about Chicago or Buffalo, New York. It's a different type of Gehinnom shel Sheleg, which we're going to see what that is. In order to get us into the mood here, though, for this topic, I imagine some of you are old enough to remember. Oops, wait. I forgot to share sound. Some of you are old enough to remember this.
Surprise! So, isn't this great? I got my own kitchen, my own bedroom.
And your very own ring around the collar.
Ring around the collar.
For a tough stain like this, you need whisk.
Yeah, but
Sprays and powders aren't good enough. Whisk does a better job. And when whisk gets out ring around the collar,
your whole wash is clean.
no more surprise visits.
And no more ring around the collar.
Whisk gets...
Okay. As sad as it is, when I was reading this parak for the first time, this commercial popped into my head. Because we think in terms of cleansing in the physical sense. We think about, you get a stain in your shirt, which almost always I can look down on my shirt after a meal and unfortunately see something. And sometimes it's just a matter of a little water will get it off. Sometimes you need a good scrubbing, and sometimes what's going to take it out is going to be a scissors. That's my cleaning method, generally, which is why I don't do cleaning. And it's a similar idea when it comes to the afterlife as well. So what I want to do is take a look at the first slide, which is kind of where we left off last week. Talk about kafakela from the perspective of what Rav Ginsburg says. Just get it up on the screen here. Here we go. Okay. Again, Rav Ginsburg is a tremendous gadol, not only in Tanya, but in areas of Kabbalah. He writes you'll see a weekly, not even a newsletter, but a whole package that comes out once a week called, it escapes me now. Oh my gosh, I read it every week. Well, I try to pretend I understand it. It'll come to me. It'll come to me. But it's outstanding. He's very much into gematria and numerology and other things too, but also he's taken Tanya and given it a very clear understanding of what's going on. He says like this, what is this cleansing, this purification, this rubbing? And the second subject is K'di'ita b'midrash, shamalach lokeach et hanefesh, and this is similar, the first part is similar to what Rav Steinsaltz told us last week, that the malach takes the person's neshama, vizorekota, he throws it, mikatzeh olam bat katzeh, from one end of the universe to the other. Now, because we're talking about spiritual, there's not necessarily a physical idea of the neshama being thrown from one end to the other, but in a spiritual sense. And what is this explanation of this is? What's the connection in the idea of throwing something that's spiritual? It meant that the person would go through, the neshama would go through a process where they would, on one end, experience for a moment where they were, what they were mired in, whatever it was at the moment, and then a completely opposite situation. Higon, for example, shishkua b'ta'avot achila or ta'avat achila gashmi. Person is a glutton. They love to eat, and they just love to eat. They love to eat for eating's sake, nothing to do with wanting to be healthy, nothing, just to eat. Ulefeta, and suddenly, in a surprising moment, ma'avirim ota, the angel changes the feeling, so to speak, of that neshama. Shekulo ruchanit elokut. That neshama is just 100% spiritual godliness. And at the moment that the neshama gets used to that new situation, that it's no longer feeling like a glutton, puts it back into that same position it was before in the gluttonous sense. This is a tremendous pain, the neshama. And as if they are like shaking up the neshama, in order to remove the dirt, as it were, from the neshama. Okay, we're talking about something spiritual, so it's using just regular words to explain something. But imagine you take a person who has, I used this example before, where you take some, in the olden days, the washing, right? You would take it, you put water, beat it on the rock, string back, beat it on the rock, and someone look at you, they have no idea what you're doing necessarily, if they didn't have the idea of what it means to clean clothing, and the thing it's like you're angry or whatever it might be. What is it you're doing? You're taking it from one end to the other end. This is not exactly the same thing, but in order to clean it, in order to get rid of that deep stain. So what it's talking about here, according to Rav Ginsburg, is it's not just like Rav Steinsaltz said that they take the neshama and throw it from one end of the universe to the other, but it's an idea that the neshama has a feeling of where it was in this world, in this person of a gluttonous individual, brings it all the way to the feeling of complete subservience to God, complete godliness and holiness, and suddenly places it back in that original position of where it was. And this back and forth each time, evidently, more and more winnows out the lichluch, or the dirt, the spiritual dirt that was with that person. I want to take a look here for 1 second in my book before we continue. Hold on. We did that. So I'll make sure I pick it up at the right place here. Okay. So if we take a look for a moment, let's go back up to the text. I'll make this bigger. And you'll see over here, where I want to pick this up, the gate num. Sorry. Then it says, Aval diburim asurim, mark where I'm at. So we talked about kafakela. That was the second possibility. The third possibility, Aval diburim asurim, when a person spoke things they're not allowed to. Molei tzanut, like not foolishness, but like acting like a moron, just stupidity. Lashon hara, and also especially lashon hara, the chiyotze bahem, and other things like that. She'en mishlosh klipot hatmeot legamrei, that they are completely, fully the shalosh klipot hatmeot. En kafakela levado mo'il letaheru le'avir mitumato. nefesh. The kafakela, that which was just described now by Ginsburg, that which was described by Rav Steinsaltz last week, is not going to be sufficient. Person is going to go to Gehinom. I'm going to read another few lines. We already did this, but I want to now get to the point where we can talk about Gehinom Shel Shelet. A person who is able to learn. In the case of a person is not able to learn, they don't have the background, they never learned, they're stam, just don't know anything. That kind of person will still need to go through a form of zikuch, some form of purification, in some kind of gehinnom, whatever it is. It may be very brief, maybe long, who knows? That's the gehinnom that we know, so to speak, the one of the fire. So too, someone who is able to learn, and he is osek, he involves himself with just wasting time. It's not enough, this kafakela, to purify him also, just like we saw before, that this person who doesn't even know how to learn anything had to go through Gehinnom, but it gets stronger for this one. Rak onashim chamurim shema'anishim al bitul Torah bifratut, levad onesh haklalit lechol bitul mitzvat aseh. He has to go through some form of punishment, and I'm using the word punishment here. He says this, and I'm using it in quotes right now. We'll see again why. That is for wasting time from learning Torah, in addition to any other kind of mitzvah a person has and just blows it off. Machmat atzlut, because the person's lazy. No, if a person can't learn because they're incapacitated, they're sick, whatever it might be, even though you have a chiyuv still to learn, there's excuses, so to speak. But a person just plain downright lazy. They know they have to learn. They know they can learn. They don't. They end up in what's called Gehinom Shel Shelet. The heck is Gehinom Shel Shelet? And again, it does not mean the Gehenna of living in Chicago with a snowstorm. It doesn't mean that. What does it mean? If we're so used to the concept of Gehinom, of fire, so what is this idea? So let's take a look at the slide. Get to it. I have to make it smaller. I know. First, I want to read something to you. I realize I found this. There is a book out there. Some of you may have it. It's called Lessons in Tanya. It's called Lessons in Tanya, and it has some very, very good insights or explanations in English. And I want to just read to you this one paragraph. The punishment of kafakela is described as being slung from one end of the world to the other, or from Israel to the other lands. The meaning of this is that the soul is flung from one extreme to the other. First, it is shown the truth and preciousness of holiness. Then it is slung into and reminded of the thoughts and words it experienced on the physical world, the most painful experience for the soul. Again, this is very similar to what Rav Ginsburg just told us. Now let's talk about this idea of, make this smaller. What does this mean, the idea of the shelet? So first we say that he talked about this idea as an onesh, as a punishment, right? But right now, Rav Ginsburg is going to clarify something for us. What's going on here with this usage of the word that the Baal Tanya uses, that it's a punishment, all these things. A Jew basically does not need to be afraid of an onesh or punishment. It's the opposite. Allah the person needs to know. That which appears as an onesh is only there for his benefit, in order to purify him. We received a neshama from Hashem. We say again, we said it last week in the class, and we say it every morning. Elokai, neshama shenatata bi tehorahi. The neshama you gave me is pure. And when we return it back to Hashem, it needs to be in its pure state. A person should be afraid to not sin. What should we should be afraid of? And he's going to discuss this again in great depth later. We should be afraid to not distance ourselves from Hashem by doing a chet. The Khan in here, when the Baal Tanya is giving us the details of these, quote, onashim or punishments, it's not to make us afraid of the punishment, the opposite. A person's told, hey, look, don't get so dirty. Because if you do, how much more so it's going to have to go through this rubbing process to get rid of it. In other words, the purpose of the kafakela, the purpose of chibut hakeva, the purpose of Gehinnom is not retribution. It's not, look what you did in this world, and therefore you're going to get punished for it. Here's your punishment. It's not stam. God doesn't do stuff like that. He says it's in order for a person to come before the Melech Malchei Amlachim. And we're going to see in a minute with this whole idea of Gehinnom Shel Shalad. But I want to make a comment first. I had the zechut over the last, when's the first wedding I ever did? Was, let's say, 1982. So 40 years I've had the zechut of marrying people. And trust me when I tell you, it is an unbelievable zechut to be able to do this. And there's a lot of stuff I go through with Chatan and Kala before they get married, what they call premarital counseling and all. And I explain every step of the wedding, beginning to end, what's halacha, what's custom. And then I talk about the wine under the chuppah. And usually I look at like, why do we need to talk about the wine under the chuppah? Because you want to make sure as best as possible, and that's part of my job when I do a wedding, that I make sure this is the case, that under the chuppah you have white wine, not red. Why? There's nothing to do with halacha. It has to do with the white dress. Because a little tiny stain of red wine on a nice, beautiful wedding dress, that is the one day in the whole life that hopefully they're wearing that dress, for that woman at least, will stand out like a sore thumb. A little bit of white wine, maybe, God forbid, spills. Okay. The one time I forgot to check, I'd already poured it, it's in my hand, and the Kala whispers to me, "Are you serious?" She looked me right in the eyes. I felt so bad. And my hands started like I was ready to shake. I was so nervous because all I needed to do is I kind of like held it and held my hand in it. So even the drop wouldn't spill on her dress. But I gave it to someone in the family to give to her carefully. Why am I mentioning this? I'll give you one more example first. The Kuntash car. I've mentioned this in the Mesilat Yesharim class as well already a long time ago. The car called the Kuntash, probably worth over $100,000, and a car from Yugoslavia called the Yugo. Both have 4 tires, an engine, and will get you from point A to point B. But if I take a little can of red spray paint and I give a psst like that somewhere on the Kuntash, and I go psst on the side of the Yugo, it's massive damage to the Kuntash, and it's nothing to the Yugo, or it's minor because it'll blend in with all the other dents and scratches in the car. Why? What's the difference? We were given lahavdil. We were given this neshama tehora. We were given the equivalent of the Kuntash. We were given the equivalent of this beautiful white dress, the Kala's white dress, and our job is to give it back to Hashem in its purest state. Unfortunately, 99.999% of us won't be able to do that after 120 years. Some will have a little bit of stain that have to get washed out. Some will have a little bit more. Some are going to have to go through a lot. And is that because it's a punishment? Let's just take it in the simplest form. Let's talk about a wedding dress. You borrow a wedding dress from a gamach. You pay, 500 shekel for the wedding dress, and you have to give it back to them clean. And at the wedding, someone comes over to give a mazel tov and accidentally spills a little bit of gravy on the side of the dress. Not even on the front, just somewhere on the side. You are going to do everything you can to get that stain out. Everything you can. Is it punishing the dress? Is that what you want to return it to the owner in its pristine state? That's the purpose of these things: the chibut hakever, kafakela, and the Gehinnom. And that's what he's telling us. It's not that we have to be afraid of the shifshuf, of the rubbing. Is we have to be afraid and concerned not to get our neshama dirty. Why? Because that represents distancing from Hashem. After 120 years, a person passes away and they need just a teeny bit of cleanliness to go through, or cleaning. Neshama can go right to Hashem after that. Again, no one knows for sure what I'm saying is right. This is speculation based on Masorah. But if a person comes with the neshama that's filthy, They have to go through a heck of a lot before they're able to go up to Shamayim. Wouldn't you want to be, or wouldn't the person want to be already closer to Hashem as soon as possible? So let's talk for a minute now what Rav Steinsaltz tells us about the idea of Gehinnom Shel Shelem. Starting from here. The assumption is that a person who is able to study Torah, and instead wastes time and is involved in things that have nothing to do with anything, he does that because he's lazy. I'll give an example. Late this afternoon, I was very tired. I haven't been sleeping well lately. You all need to know that. That's great. I haven't been sleeping well. And also in general, my body rhythm, my clock from 2 to 4 is the worst of the day as far as tiredness, which is sadly because that's usually when I'm doing teaching for private students. That's when it is. So that helps me a lot. But okay, so what I could have done is I could have taken up Parshat Shavua and looked it over. I could have prepared a little bit more for tonight. I could have taken out Gemara Pesachim Yerushalmi that I'm learning. I could have learned more Shulchan Aruch. There's a bazillion things I could have done. What did I do? I went on the computer and played around and looked at YouTube and a couple things I was just interested in. Now, on the one hand, it's okay because maybe it's not wasting time, because if I'm doing that to refresh myself so that I can be able to teach and be awake, we saw already that that's raising that from Klipat Noga to some level Kedusha. Is that me trying to justify what I did? Is it me tricking myself into thinking I'm doing the right thing? Maybe. Or it's maybe just plain old laziness. And if it's plain old laziness, it's a waste of time. When it comes to laziness, there's a general punishment from Hashem. It's in the Gehenna of snow. What does that mean? They say that there are 2 types of Gehenna. Gehinnom shel esh, Gehinnom shel shelem. One is of fire, that most people picture, and one is of snow. Gehinnom shel esh, when a person is in Gehinnom shel esh, of fire, person did something, we say in one of the al-chetz, we ran to do the sin. We did something with gusto, so to speak. We ate that cheeseburger with, we really wanted it. We talked Lashon Hara, we really wanted it. We were like this fire burning in us to do something wrong. The converse is Gehinnom shel esh. The Gehinnom shel sheleg, and the Gehinnom of snow, his punishment comes as a result of him not running, not getting excited to do the mitzvah, not getting excited to the davening, not excited to learn Torah. Since he wasn't on fire, so to speak, to do the mitzvah, he didn't try any way whatsoever to do it, and was lazy. It was cold relative to the mitzvah, and when he was cold relative to the mitzvah, his punishment is cold. When he's hot to do the avera, his punishment is hot in response. Again, we say punishment is zikuch. That's the purification process. But I'm using the word onesh because that's the word that's in the book. So there's 2 types of Gehinnom. Each one commensurate with what the person did in his or her life. And that's what the Tanya is talking about over here in this paragraph. Oops, why did I just do that? Let's go back to the text. Make this bigger. Okay. This next section here, from here to the end of the chapter, which hopefully we'll finish tonight. I won't finish necessarily all the discussion on it, but at least we'll get the reading in. A little bit of background on understanding. Chochmot umot ovdei giluli. What does it mean? What does it mean learning non-Jewish knowledge? What does that mean? So I'm going to give you a little synopsis so you don't lose your mind right away. Because when you start to read this and you don't read the whole paragraph, it can get you mad. It can get you like, what? What's he talking about? Is math Torah? Is science Torah? Is philosophy Torah? Is any of these things? Is mechanics Torah? The answer is yes and no. What do I mean? A person who learns philosophy just for philosophical reasons, because they like philosophy, they want to take Plato and Aristotle and all these, and just to pontificate about things for the sake of pontification, or they want to learn astronomy just for the sake of astronomy, then that falls into the category of osek bechochmot umot ovdei gilulim. Person is involving themselves in the wisdom or the knowledge of the non-Jewish world. However, we also know that a person who uses that information, and we're going to see details soon, astronomy, you can, if you open the Rambam in Hilchot Madad, I've started about a year ago, I started learning Rambam Yomi. And there's this one section where he talks about the movements of the stars, movements of the constellations, the earth, the revolving of the earth. It is, I mean, you need probably a triple degree in astronomy and physics to understand anything he's talking about there. But that's all Torah. We'll see a little bit more detail when I get to that. What about a person who just likes math? That's great. There's nothing wrong with liking math. But if the purpose of liking math and enjoying math is just to be able to do a puzzle, then that's chochmot hagoyim. If it's because you also can then understand things more in Torah, such as the halachot and sukkah, halachot and eruvin, other things, that's already changing it to bring it up its level to kedusha. Now, with that little bit of background, let's read this paragraph here. V'chein, starting from here, osek. I need to take my glasses off and look at my book. V'chein osek b'chochmot umot haolam, or of day gilulim, person who's involved in the learning of subjects that are non-Torah subjects. Bichlal, dvarim, betelim, yechashev le'inyan avon bitul Torah. If instead of sitting there learning Parshat Shavua or Shulchan Aruch or whatever it might be, person sits there and decides they're going to read Plato or Aristotle, stam, that falls into the category of bitul Torah, of wasting time from Torah, and is considered sinful. When he says K'moshe katati ilchot Talmud Torah, that's not the book of the Rambam of Talmud Torah, halachot ilchot Talmud Torah, but rather his. He wrote a small treatise, the Tanya. He wrote many things besides Tanya. The main one he's known for is Tanya, but he also wrote many things, including a piece called Ilchot Talmud Torah. He says, as I said over there, this is the same thing situation. It's even more so, he says. He says, if I put see, it does say it's going to end in 10 minutes. It didn't seem to help. Oh well. When it tells me, when I have, what just happened here? You're still with me, right? Yes. What happened to the screen share? Let me go back to it. That is so weird. I got to figure this out. When you put two things next to each other, on the one hand, you have tumat dvarim betelim. You just wasted time. You're just talking, wasting time. Or you spend time learning philosophy. Stam, again, I'm just using that as an example of like Plato or Aristotle. The impact to you is worse when you spend time on this philosophy than just stam pitfutim, just wasting time speaking. Why? Because when a person wastes time just talking with no purpose whatsoever, what are they doing? They're quote only affecting the neshama itself to the extent of klipat noga. Next page. I'll explain all this in a minute, make it clearer. B'nafsho habahamit kidele'el. V'lo bechinat chabad shebenafsho me'achar shehem divei shtut u'borut shkam hashotim v'amei haaretz yicholim ledaber ken. When it comes to wasting time and just talking shtuyot and not doing anything constructive, it affects the neshama. That's true. I'm giving you right now just the general translation. Mashe'en ken, over here, Mashe'en ken, v'chochmat ha'umot when it comes to studying things such as philosophy of the nations, you affect your nefesh bahamit by wasting time just talking for no purpose. But when it comes to using your intellect and use your intellect for something that's wrong and that you're not going to use for Torah purposes, you affect your nefesh elokit, your godly soul, betumat klipat noga shebechachmot elu shenaflu shama b'shvirat hakelim mibchedat hachoraim shachokma d'kusha l'shiyodeh liyodeh chen. I'm not going to explain that last sentence right now. What is he telling us? I'm going to read a note to you that I wrote to myself in my book. Okay, it's right here, top of the page. It says as follows: idle chatter contaminates the lev, contaminates the person's heart, their neshama, but not their intellect. But chokhmat umot haolam contaminates the intellect as it is heavily involved in the action. This should sound familiar to you already. We talked about this idea of why is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah keneged kulam? Why do we say the mitzvah of Torah is it overarches every single thing else, every other mitzvah? We said as follows: when I do a mitzvah, I'm doing the Ratzon Hashem, right? I'm doing the will of God. What am I doing when I learn Torah? The will of Hashem becomes a part of me. If I sell vegetables and I make money, I'm dealing in vegetables. It doesn't physically affect me other than parnasah. It doesn't affect me internally. But when I eat the vegetables, it becomes a part of me. When I learn Torah, it affects me intellectually. It affects me as I become more close to God. I am ingesting, so to speak, the Ratzon of Hashem. So instead of ingesting the Ratzon of Hashem, what am I doing? I'm incorporating these other things into my Chokhmah Binah Da'at. I'm also into my intellect, and that is causing me more damage and harm. Ela im kain. This is all said, it's true unless oseotan kardom lachtoch bahen. Unless you use it, it's an expression, you use it as a shovel to cut through with them. What does that mean? Dahainu de lehit parnes mehen berevach lavodat Hashem. What about a person who's a math teacher, science teacher, philosophy teacher? And the purpose is to make money. They're making an income, so they can buy svarim, that they can keep Shabbat, that they can do mitzvot. Then you have taken that and elevated up. Then it's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. Or you know how to use these tools that you're learning, the philosophy. For example, when we learned Kuzari over a period of a few years, so part of it was dealing with Aristotelian philosophy. How is that okay? How is that mixed in Kuzari? Why was he allowed? Because he was able to use that as a basis either for comparison or for contrast, and it was raised up to that level. It wasn't just affecting the person's intellect on a spiritual sense, it was also being raised to a level of Torah. So he uses that either to serve Hashem or leTorato. What does that mean for his Torah? Again, if I want to know, I'm in the middle of learning Hilchot Eruvin. For those of you who go to the Nesilat Yesharim class, you'll know why it has to do with this whole page a day of Shulchan Aruch business I got into. It's not the most interesting. It's very dry. Honestly, it's very boring unless you're learning it because you need to know how to make an Eruv and all. But in order to understand a lot of it, your math needs to be really sharp. Even basic math, just plain old-fashioned geometry. I hated geometry. I'm not sure which I hated more, geometry, trigonometry, or algebra. Probably just trigonometry. But that's fine. But when I learn it, if I learn it in order to understand these halachot, or I learn astronomy, I love astronomy. If I learn it to understand what does it mean Kiddush HaChodesh, what does it mean the molad? What does exactly the molad even mean? It doesn't mean the numeral. Then that's raising it up to the level of okay, to the level of Kedusha. Not only okay, it's Kedusha. And this is the reason why it was okay. The Rambam and the Ramban and all those others who involve themselves in learning these kind of chokhmot, these kind of ideas and learnings, because it helped to elevate them and bring it to a level of Torah that they can use it also to teach. The Vilna Gaon, my understanding, they tell a lot of stories about the Vilna Gaon, some are probably true even, was that he wrote books on math. And he wrote books on math so he and his students could understand many of the things in the Gemara. It's just something as simple as a round sukkah. Gemara discusses, is a round sukkah okay? They talk about if you can describe a square of a certain size within a round circle, if it's X amount of size, is it okay? It's not. In order to do that, you need to know math. So the time's going to run out on the recording, so I'm going to stop in 1 minute. But I think it's important to understand that what this chapter is telling us, and I'll give you more of a real summary next week, is that we have all this, we're talking about this chapter, the last few chapters, is 100% up to you and me. This is all in our hands. We determine by our actions what happens after 120 years. We determine if something is just going to stay klipat noga, if this cup of water is going to stay klipat noga or elevated somehow to kedusha. We determine if something which is gimel klipot tmeot, such as lashon hara, somehow we're able to do something with that. It's all up to us. That's part of this book we're learning. The topic which we have left behind in the dust months ago remember, this is called, what was this book called? Not just Tanya, it was also called the book for the Beinonim, right? Sefer Beinonim. We haven't even touched that yet. We're going to start learning about that next week. Bezrat Hashem, starting chapter 9, we're going to talk about Tzadikim and Rishayim, definitions, what they are, what they're not, then get to Beinonim, and then start to do some understanding some of the beginning of the book, some of the answers from questions that we had. But right now, I'll give it, like I said, a nice, hopefully, summary next week of chapter 8. And then we'll move into chapter 9 also next week. In the meantime, wish you all a wonderful evening. And thank you for being here this evening. And for those of you who do come to or attend online, the Mesilat Yesharim class, we're on for 9 a.m. tomorrow. For those of you who have any interest, I'm speaking tomorrow night. It's the 4th time I'm speaking in 48 hours. No, less. I spoke this morning for the senior group and tomorrow night for AACI online. And you're welcome to join with the link that you can get from me. Have a nice life. It's been a pleasure. Bye.